Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are back in the saddle now. Thanks for your patience over the last couple of weeks, where we've had a couple of, don't want to say long absences, but several day absences. But time off is coming to an end. The summer is coming to an end. That probably means we'll be more consistent in our posting schedule going forward. So we are closing in on the midway point of the 2035 season. Our Buffalo Wings have been not playing as well recently, but still are the best team in baseball with a 9.5 game lead on the Montreal Expos in the National League East. Taking a look at the broader standings, the Las Vegas A's are the second best team in baseball at 45-28. So we've got a 4 game lead on the A's at this point for the best record in baseball and home field advantage. Jenneret and Seifu are 2-3 in the batting race. Jenneret leading the league, or tied for the league lead in homers, leading the league in ribbies. So certainly in the mix for a potential triple crown. Seifu running away with the lead in stolen bases, looking to do that for an 8th consecutive season. Jenneret leading the league in OPS. So the offense has been good. And Juan Estrada is second in the National League in ERA. And Bryce Miller is third in the league in saves. So a lot of pretty solid performances here on June 21st. But being June 21st, in addition to being the first day of summer, it is also the first-year player draft. And by virtue of the best record in baseball during the regular season last year, with a 112-win team that finally ended up winning a world championship as well, we've got the last pick in the first round. We'll be picking 34th. And then we do have a supplemental pick 8 picks later. So we've got 2 of the next 9 picks. Unfortunately, a lot of the players, pretty much all of the players that we mentioned in our last episode, are off the board. We thought at 34 there was a chance that someone who was a higher end prospect might fall to us. But you can see over the last 15 or so picks, there's been a lot of starting pitchers that have come off the board. Kadeem Obear, the shortstop out of Ocilla, Georgia, was the number 1 overall pick. And the twin Bobby Pattons ended up going number 5 overall to the Diamondbacks and number 8 overall to the Mets. So we'll be interested in seeing what Bobby Patton 1 and Bobby Patton 2 end up doing over the course of their careers. So as we think about what we're going to do here in Buffalo with the 34th pick and then ultimately the 42nd pick with our supplemental pick that's coming up in the first round, we're not going to go with one of the highly regarded relievers that is still out there. There are a couple of starting pitching prospects. Devin Cabuto has a fastball, a sinker, and a cutter that aren't too far off major league quality. Really like the personality with the high work ethic and intelligence. Really like the durability. He's almost 19 years old, so a little older for a high school prospect. Throws in the low to mid 90s. His movement and control both look like they could be really good. His stuff is kind of the question. If his fastball, his sinker, and his cutter all develop into that 60 to 70 range that our scout thinks they could, he could be a pretty effective major league pitcher. So he's not a uninteresting prospect at number 34 overall, looking for a slot. Bert Durney, a 17-year-old Aussie prospect. The concern with him is if that changeup doesn't develop, he probably ends up as a reliever. Do like that he's a lefty. His fastball and his splitter both look like they could be excellent, but not a guy that we would likely go after this early. And a couple other starting pitching prospects are Kevin Hale out of Honolulu, Hawaii, another somewhat older prospect, almost 19, going to be turning 19 in a week. Also going to be completely reliant on that changeup developing to end up as a starter. If he does end up as a starter, though, he's got an excellent stamina and a pretty good hold runners rating, so he could be interesting from that perspective. And that last but not least, Mike McElwain, 6'7", 18-year-old, has the high work ethic we like to see, already throws in the low to mid 90s, and his fastball, sinker, and cutter are not too far off major league quality. And we think if he fully develops, his stuff, his movement, and his control could all be well above average. He's looking for more than slot at this point at $7.5 million. He's got a really silly nickname as Township Mayor. But to me, if we were going to go for a pitcher now or 8 picks from now, Mike McElwain or Devin Cabuto, to me, would be the 2 most likely alternatives. And for purposes of the video, we'll take a look at the 3.5 star or higher potential hitting prospects as well. Jeff Marsh is a guy that we did talk about last time around, 4.5 star potential third baseman. Not stellar defensively, although he does have a very good arm, like the high work ethic. Looks that the bat could certainly be above average at a major league level with good home run power. Like the durability. Doesn't thrill me, but we're generally probably not going to find a prospect that thrills us at 34 and 42 in the draft. Alexis Mazuka is a center fielder, has a pretty solid outfield range, like his durability, bats left-handed, and looks like he could have a pretty interesting bat. Has enough speed to take advantage of that potential gap power and potentially his plus home run power as well. Dave McPherson is a right fielder. He's somewhat less interesting to us than the first 2 that we looked at. Below average speed, decent but not exceptional outfield range, pretty below average in terms of his error rating. In the bat, could be above average if it completely develops, but is nothing special. Greg Bauer, as we get into the 3.5 star prospects, according to our scout, like the high loyalty, work ethic, the low greed, doesn't bring much to the table in terms of his speed or his defensive ability. And the bat, again, could be a decent major league bat, but is not a special major league bat in my mind. Chris Humbertson, 17-year-old right fielder. Another guy who's a decent but uninspiring prospect. Could be a bit above average hitting-wise. Could be a bit above average on the base paths. And with his bunting skill, a very mediocre corner outfielder defensively, though. Chris Mack, second baseman. Somewhat more interesting, although he doesn't bring a ton to the table defensively now. His contact and his avoid strikeout ratings are close to being off the charts. Gap power potentially excellent, plus home run power, has a little bit of speed. A bit more interesting to me than the last 3 prospects we've looked at. Marsh, Mazuka, and Mack are kind of my 3 favorites of these first 6. Center fielder Julio Prieto, kind of more of a corner outfielder, probably a left fielder most likely. Guy who has a potential plus bat, but again, not an exceptional bat. Ian Shelton, a second baseman. He's got some speed. Again, a guy whose bat, if it fully develops, is a little better than major league average, but not exciting. And then a few final higher regarded prospects according to our scout. Center fielder Chris Taylor. Really like the outfield range. He's got an above average arm. Has a little bit of speed as well to take advantage of that gap power. Not a special bat, but a potentially useful bat. Mike Whitehead is a shortstop. Like the 65 infield range, like the high work ethic and intelligence. And if it fully develops, his bat is one of the more interesting in this class to me, with potentially 70 contact, 70 gap power, 65 avoid Ks, and still above average home run power. Gotta be fair and scale down my interest in the gap power a bit, given the 45 speed, but still is a guy who probably can hit some doubles. And then Chris Wicker, 6'5", third baseman. Interesting-ish defensively, particularly if he gets better over time. Like the high work ethic. The bat is nothing special, though. Seems like a similar theme with a lot of these guys that we've looking at. A lot of these guys here at the end of the first round have bats that could be a bit above average if they fully develop, but as we've said on multiple occasions, unlikely to be exceptional for most of them. And not surprisingly, our scout recommends we go with Bugs Marsh, the third baseman, who is his most highly rated prospect on the board. As we talked about, there are things to like about him: the durability, the high work ethic, the fact that he could have a plus bat with good home run power, and a pretty strong arm to make those throws across the infield from the hot corner. So there's definitely value in Marsh. I don't love him, but it's not inconceivable that he could end up being our pick. And those of you who have been watching me over the years will not be surprised with the direction that we're going to end up going here. But when I don't fall in love with any position players, I tend to end up going with a pitcher. And that's what we are going to do here. I don't hate Marsh as a prospect. If he's around 8 more picks from now at 42, would certainly consider him. I don't think he will be around. I like Alexis Mazuka, but given that he's impossible to sign, my hunch is he may fall a bit further. Maybe we take him in the 2nd or 3rd round if he's still around. And among the other position players, I like Chris Mack. If he's around 8 picks from now, I would certainly strongly consider him. And I also like the shortstop Mike Whitehead. If he's around 8 picks from now, would strongly consider him as well. But I tend to think we'll be able to add one of those 4 position players that I just mentioned, certainly with the next pick we have. My hope is that it's not Mazuka. My hope is it's someone who's looking for somewhat more reasonable money. But with Marsh, Mack, and Whitehead all on the board right now, it's not inconceivable that one of those 3 would be available when we pick again at 42. I'm going to pass, although I like him, on Mike McElwain for a similar reason to passing on Mazuka. Looking for $7.5 million, so it's more likely to me that he may be available with our supplemental pick than it is to me that Devin Cabuto would be available. I really like the personality here with the high work ethic and the intelligence particularly. I like the durability as far as his injury proneness. I like that he's got 3 pitches at the age of 18, almost 19, that aren't far off major league quality. Pretty good at holding runners, potentially plus movement and control. And I do think that if the fastball, sinker, and cutter all develop the way that we hope they will with good coaching and his strong work ethic in the minors, that his stuff could ultimately maybe be a little bit higher than our scout tends to think it is right now. So it's probably a little bit of a reach, but I tend to go for pitchers when I don't fall in love with any of the other prospects. And as we kind of talk through, my hope is that there may be a position player that we like 8 picks from now. So we are going to go ahead and draft Devin Cabuto here. Auto draft until our next pick. Scouting director still recommends Bugs Marsh, so he's still available. Any of the other batters we liked available. Chris Mack is still available. and Mike Whitehead is still available. So that is good news. Mizuka's also there. So all four of the position players we were intrigued by are available. And it looks like the other expensive starting pitcher is gone, actually, who's looking for $7.5 million. I've already forgotten his name, but the other pitcher that we kind of liked and would have considered if he fell to this point, and the position players weren't available, is gone, so that's not an option. So now here at number 42 overall, with our supplemental first round pick that we got for the departure of Cam Collier, just a matter of deciding which position player we want to go with here. And I think all four of these guys have their value. Marsh certainly isn't going to be around when we're picking near the end of the second round. As we've talked about, like the work ethic, like the durability. Don't like the glove right now with the exception of the arm, and think he could certainly be a plus bat at third base with above average home run power. I don't think he's a star. I think he's a good, solid major league third baseman if he fully develops, though. And there's certainly value in a late first round supplemental pick getting that type of player. Mizuka, I really like the contact and gap power combination, especially given his speed, like the outfield range, like the durability. I tend to think he is a guy who could linger till the second, maybe the third round. We may take a flyer on the impossible to sign guy then, but not going to spend a pick on him now. Chris Mack, the second baseman, intrigues me. Concerned about his glove. I don't know where you play him in the infield other than first base at this point with that 6'3" size. Can't play him in the outfield. And although hopefully with good coaching and training we can maybe get some of those defensive ratings a bit higher, seems like the arm is always going to be a pretty significant issue, even at second base. But I do like the bat. And then that takes us to the shortstop, Mike Whitehead. Like the bat with him as well. Like the high work ethic and intelligence. Like the 65 infield range. The speed is not exceptional. So as we talked about earlier, got to be fair about that and not go nuts about the 70 gap power given the 45 speed. But still think he can hit some doubles like he has in high school. But I really like the contact with plus home run power potentially and really good infield range. Not looking for a ton of money, like the personality in terms of his development. So we're going to go with the shortstop Mike Whitehead here with our supplemental pick in the first round. Draft Whitehead, and we'll see who's around in round 2. And it's kind of interesting, McElwain, the pitcher that we did like, went with the first supplemental pick to the Tigers. Definitely think his upside is very interesting. Could definitely argue that we should have went with him rather than Cabuto. I do prefer the more well-rounded personality of Cabuto, and I do like the durability of Cabuto. That's obviously why I went with him, because I preferred him. But to be fair, McElwain does have high work ethic, although not all of the other traits are as good. Does have 3 pitches that are close to major league quality here, and our scout at least thinks that on balance, those 3 pitches can be a little better. They both have really good movement and control, but you certainly favor McElwain a little bit. We'll see. We'll certainly follow them both over the course of their development. But overall, we're still happy getting a starting pitching prospect in Cabuto and a pretty interesting shortstop prospect in Mike Whitehead here with our first 2 picks of this 2035 draft. And it's a odd situation here in the second round. The 3 guys that we talked about, Marsh, Mizuka, and Mack, are all still available. So that's an interesting development. Our scout, for some reason, is not touting Jeff Marsh to us anymore, and is instead suggesting the reliever Bobby Bairds, who certainly looks like he could be a pretty good relief pitcher. I think the second round might be a little early for that still. I think we're going to go with Marsh at this point. In the second round, a durable player who looks like he could have a plus bat with good home run power and potentially be a really good third baseman if we can get his range and his error rating improved a bit with that arm already. No guarantees that that'll happen, but I don't think he's horrible value for a second rounder, not looking for a ton of money. Still hold up hope that the impossible to sign Mazuka may be a guy we can pick in a later round. But with Marsh still on the board here, we're going to take the guy who has been the highest rated prospect according to our scout for 3 consecutive picks. And we'll move on to the third round. Mazuka's still around. The other second baseman is gone now. Let's see where he ended up going. Chris Mack. So yeah, he lasted all the way to the 24th pick in this round. If he was around here in the third round, certainly would have been someone for us to consider, but didn't make it back to us this time. And here in the third round, our scout recommends that we go with Bupis Prieto. Decent center fielder prospect, more of a corner outfielder, quite honestly. Does have some pop in the bat. We're going to disregard that suggestion, though, and we are going to go with a left-handed starting pitching prospect. Coleman. His fastball, his sinker, and his splitter aren't too far off major league level, so we think he can have 3 major league quality pitches when all is said and done. Has the stamina and the hold running ratings to be a decent starter. I think his movement and his control and his stuff could all be slightly above average to well above average, and also his high work ethic in our view. And he's also a left-hander. Not a frontline prospect, but for a third rounder, given that we like to roll as many dice as we can on pitchers, we're going to go with Coleman here in the third. Not ruling out Mr. Mazuka, but wanted to try to get better value on him, and he is still available here in the fourth for us, as is Prieto, who our scout recommended last time around. And, of course, the logic of our scout, after he recommends a player and we don't take him, he recommends somebody else the next time around, even though he's not on the board. Or he's still on the board in the case of Prieto. In this case, he's recommending Walt Biddings. Decent right field prospect. Doesn't bring much defensively. Is durable. Could have decent home run power. Got some decisions to make here. Is it time to take a flyer on Mazuka and think that maybe with the money that we do have available in the budget this year, that we don't end up using it on bringing on some salary as we get closer to the trade deadline, and we can use it on maybe bringing in a guy like Mazuka in August if his demands get a little more reasonable and we try to land him. Certainly an angle to consider. But I honestly don't hate in the fourth round Julio Prieto, the guy that was recommended last round, with him still being on the board. Like the work ethic, think he's a corner outfielder, but with that 65 home run power and generally being average or potentially above average in all of the other batting categories, he could be a useful player for us. And we're also kind of at the point in the draft where a highly regarded reliever like Norge Carlos Burnside is also someone we'd at least consider now. He's durable, potentially has a excellent fastball and an excellent sinker which would give him plus stuff, plus movement, and plus control as a potentially good right-handed arm out of the bullpen. And we're going to roll the dice a little bit here in the 4th round. Mazuka, to me, is the best player on the board. There's a chance, given that he's impossible to sign, that he'll last to the 5th round. I don't think Prieto will, and I like Prieto, and he's much more reasonable with the money he's looking for. So we're going to get a little greedy and try to play it the only way possible to land both of them, which to me is grabbing Prieto now and hoping Mazuka's price tag scares people off. So we're going to draft Prieto, and Mazuka is still around in the 5th. I think we're going to take a flyer on Mazuka now. We've got 5+ weeks, closer to 6 weeks, until we get to the trade deadline. So probably not even going to try to sign him until after we get through the trade deadline. But if the way things turn out, we don't spend a lot of money bringing on contracts, our team is relatively healthy, and we've got money to spend, I don't mind having the negotiating rights to Mazuka in August if we can know exactly down to the penny what we could potentially offer him after we've signed all of our other players, hopefully, that we drafted, and also gotten through the trade deadline so we know what our salary is going to look like. So it's not inconceivable we never even make an offer to Mazuka, but as a 5th round flyer, if we've got money left, I think he's good value here. So we're going to go ahead and draft Mazuka in the 5th round. So we're through the draft now. We've made offers to all of our top 5 picks, as well as a 7th round starting pitcher, Johnny Pop, with the exception of Alexis Mazuka. As I mentioned, we're going to wait, see what our financial situation looks like at the beginning of August after we've gotten through the trade deadline and hopefully gotten all of these other players signed, and then we'll know exactly what we can potentially offer Mazuka in our efforts to extract a lot of value out of that 5th round pick potentially. And we've simmed ahead to July 1st, and basically the midway point of the season. 80 games through the year, 56-24 record, 8-2 over our last 10. So playing a bit better to get the winning percentage up to 700. And the A's have not been playing as well recently. They are now tied with the Brewers for the 2nd best record in baseball at 49-33. Though those guys are 8 behind us for the best record in baseball, and we're up 11 games on the Marlins in the East. So things still really good. Jenneret continues to threaten for a potential triple crown for us. Seifu looks likely to lead the league in steals as long as he keeps playing. Estrada has fallen to 3rd in the National League in ERA, although his ERA is better than when we checked in with him last time around. Barajas, our co-ace, is 9-3 with a 2.70 ERA, tied for 2nd in the league in wins, and Bryce Miller is 2nd in the league in saves. So it's still going very well for our Buffalo Wings here in 2035. And checking in on those team statistics, 16-11 in record in June, and we were below 500 for a good chunk of the month. 592 winning percentage is certainly solid, but it is the worst month of the year we've had so far. That said, 56-24, we're only a game above Pythagorean expectations, so we're basically doing what we should be doing. Have gotten lucky with a 20-6 record in one-run games, crushing left-handed pitching and doing extremely well against right-handed pitching as well this year. We rank 1st in the National League in runs scored, and you can see we are 1st in almost every offensive category here. The only exceptions are 3rd in homers, 2nd in walks, 5th in strikeouts, and 4th in base running efficiency. Otherwise, we lead the league in everything. 2nd in the National League in runs allowed, and we are in the top handful of teams in just about every pitching category, exceptions being BABIP, where we're ninth, strikeouts, where we're eighth, and we are a middle of the pack team defensively, but with the great pitching and the outstanding hitting that we've received so far, even with relatively average defense, we are still having an excellent season thus far. And we'll check in on how our individual players are performing. We already touched on Alexis Barajas, 9-3 with a 2.70 ERA, 102 strikeouts, and 93 1/3 innings pitched. With the way he's pitched this year and the fact he won Game 7 of the World Series for us last year, we'd have to say that 31 games into his tenure with a 14-7 record for us, he's doing what we hoped he would do as our ace. Would like to get him signed to a long-term contract at some point. Probably not going to happen over the next year and a half, though. Once we know whether Shamar Jenneret's going to opt into his contract following the 2036 season or not, that's going to help determine exactly what we can do. If Jenneret opts out, that gives us a lot more flexibility payroll-wise. If Jenneret opts in, as we've talked about, Jenneret is pressing for a triple crown this year, so he's an incredibly productive player. If he opts in, it's not the end of the world with the money that we're paying him. But if he opts in, we'll just have to get a little more creative and maybe need to make some trades to ensure that we can keep Barajas for the long term. Our other co-ace, Sincere Shazier, not as good. His 8-3 record is close to where Barajas is, but a 4.64 ERA. That said, his Sierra is 380. Probably gotten a little bit unlucky this year with a BABIP of 325 against him, which is highest that it's ever been historically in his career. Juan Estrada, 7-2, 2.38 ERA. And in terms of batting, he's hitting just 262 for us. He is a two-way player. Still drawing a lot of walks, though, with 24 walks in only 168 at-bats on the season. So he's still been an above-average offensive player and very good pitcher for us as well. Shazier and Estrada, we both signed to extensions this past offseason. As we've talked about, we want to with Barajas also. Signing Carrillo to an extension is something we'd also consider. We did hold off on him, though, because even though he led the National League with 21 wins last year, felt like he may have gotten a little bit lucky there, and we wanted to see him do it again. And hopefully our patience with him is well placed. He's got a 5-3 record this year, but a 5.19 ERA. His BABIP is 60 points higher than it was a year ago, although his Sierra is similar to where it was. Not quite as lucky or effective as he was a year ago. Probably going to make his arbitration number for next season a little more palatable and maybe make his long-term demands a little more reasonable as well. And the youngster Isidro Ochoa, 6-2 with a 3 ERA since he got into the rotation. So he has done a better job for us in the rotation this year than he has in some of his previous tries. So it looks like we've got five relatively young starters, all in their 20s. We've got Shazier and Estrada signed for many years to come. Barajas and Carrillo, we still have arbitration years with both of them next year, so they're under our control. And Ochoa, with just 1 year and 49 days of service, is still making the major league minimum, followed by 3 to 4 arbitration eligible years. So feel like we've got control for the near to medium term of this rotation. If this is the 5-man rotation we want to keep going with. Bryce Miller, although he's second in the league in saves, 4.76 ERA, 16 walks in 34 innings, striking out less than a batter per inning. Sierra up to 4.43. His hold on the position was tenuous entering this year. Decided to give him the opportunity, but maybe time to make a change there. Lauren Walborn continues to do really well in a high volume stopper role for us. 72 innings pitched, 90 strikeouts, 3.12 ERA. Not as dominant as he was a year ago, at least in terms of the ERA, but he's actually striking out more batters this year, and his Sierra is a little lower. He would be an obvious guy to consider as a closer, but we're getting such great volume with him in that stopper role that I don't know that we want to change that. We've only gotten 16 innings from Juan Veliz, though, in a setup role as a left-hander, since presumably the left-hander Walborn is getting a lot of those opportunities. So I think what we're going to do right now is we're going to promote Juan Veliz into the closer role and move Bryce Miller into a setup role and see if we can get Mr. Veliz some more opportunities to pitch, and also see if maybe he can settle into that closer role. Comparing him to Bryce Miller, Veliz's stuff is certainly better, pretty similar to control. Miller has better movement on his pitches, but Veliz still above average movement on his pitches. Giving up one home run this year in 16 innings pitched. Would like to see what he can maybe do in that role. Andrew Painter is another guy we'd consider as a closer. Hayden Yinger, former starter, now in a middle relief role for us, doing very well. Johanne Varejo, 4.04 ERA, so a bit higher, but he is a pitcher that I do have a fair amount of confidence in. The youngster. He's finally going to be headed to arbitration this coming season, expected to make about $2.8 million. But he's striking out over a batter an inning. His Sierras have consistently been in the high twos for us, and he's very effective against right-handers. Matthew Wenzel in that specialist role has a 2.52 ERA as our lefty specialist / long reliever, and then Harleen Susanna, former starter, 3.45 ERA over 31 and a third innings pitched. So figure with Susanna and Painter in particular, we do have people who could be our fifth starter if we ultimately make some changes in the rotation or want to make some or have some injuries. And we're going to give Veliz a chance as a closer right now. As I said, I love Walborn in that stopper, high-volume role for us. If Veliz doesn't work out, we could go back to Miller, but between Painter, Yinger, feel that there's other options we could try as closer as well. So even though we've slipped back to the second-best pitching staff in the National League this year in terms of runs allowed from first where we'd been the last couple of seasons, still feel like it's been a pretty productive pitching staff. The rotation's good. The bullpen's good. We're always willing to add talent as we get closer to the trade deadline over the next month, but doesn't seem like there are any urgent needs to me in terms of our pitching staff. So now we'll turn to our everyday players for this excellent Buffalo Wings offense. We've already talked about what Juan Estrada has done for us. Medina and Miller are in a platoon at catcher. Miller facing the right-handed pitchers. Picked him up in a trade with Philadelphia this past offseason, hitting .274, 7 homers and 22 ribbies in 179 at-bats, 1.8 WAR on the season, 822 OPS, 132 WRC plus with above average defense. He's become a pretty useful player for us. Really happy to have him on board. Andres Medina excels defensively, not quite the same with the bat, hitting .214, does have 4 homers and 98 at-bats, but he's also struck out 31 times, which is his issue. Below average 90 WRC plus, still a 0.7 WAR. Think that the situation we have right now at catcher is pretty solid with Miller starting more often than not. We can potentially bring in Medina as an excellent defensive substitute, and he is still playing regularly against left-handed pitching at this point to give Miller a rest. Mike Heiner, former Rookie of the Year, been an all-star each of his first 2 seasons in the majors. Struggling a bit this year. The batting average, which had been over 300 each of his first 2 years, has plunged to just 246. Does have 12 homers and 305 at-bats. He's stolen 17 bases. So still an above average offensive player, but not nearly as dynamic as he's been in the past. You can see his BABIP is down over 100 points from last year. Hope that he's just gotten unlucky. We look at his ratings and he still maybe is not a 300 hitter, but should be a pretty productive offensive player. So would expect bigger things from Heiner over the second half of the season. Marcelo Meyer, back on the team this year, hitting 243, 10 doubles, but only 2 homers and 152 at-bats. He's been a close to average offensive player for us, put up half a win above replacement, thanks largely to his good defense. Don't need him to be an everyday player for us, but think that with that glove, there is still value if we can keep him healthy. Joe Edwards, utility infielder for us, batting just 228, but his on-base percentage is 375 by virtue of his 49 walks in 72 games, and he's also got 16 homers and 219 at-bats. So a bit of a feast or famine, 3 true outcomes type player with the 16 homers, the 49 walks, the 70 strikeouts in 219 at-bats. But you can't complain about the 134 WRC plus, WAR of close to 2, and a guy who can play multiple positions in the infield for us. Speaking of multiple positions in the infield, Deshaun Seifu has pivoted a bit to be playing a bit more third base for us this year. He is second on the team with a 3.3 WAR. As we've talked about, he's on his way to leading the league in stolen bases for an 8th straight year. Looks like he's on his way to another 200 hit season. Looks like he's on the way to another 300 batting average. Could be in contention to lead the league in doubles or triples again when all is said and done. So another vintage offensive season with a 120 WRC plus from the former number 1 overall pick 9 years ago. Turning to our shortstops, we've got the platoon with Steve, actually not the platoon right now with Steve Anderson, because Hull is playing at second base against left-handed pitching. Anderson's an everyday shortstop for us. The youngster hitting 257, only 2 home runs in 140 at-bats. He's had some injury issues this year when he's been in the lineup, though. He has been a above-average offensive player, and with that 70 range, would expect him to be a above-average defensive player as well. Tim Hull, former starting shortstop, now in more of a platoon role for us, hitting 337 with 10 doubles and 2 homers and 101 at-bats, 152 WRC plus, definitely benefiting from only playing against left-handed pitching in most situations. View Hull as potentially a super utility guy for us, along with Joe Edwards in the coming years. Kind of feel like Anderson is penciled in at short, Heiner is penciled in at first, Seifu is penciled in at second or third, and then Edwards and Hull, perhaps along with another veteran in the future like Marcelo Meyer, can fill utility infield roles while also playing second, third, or short for us as needed. In the case of Edwards, he can play just about anywhere for us. Turning to the outfielders, and Bobby Bolig, 290 average with 13 homers and 231 at-bats. The 143 WRC plus he's put up this year is the best he's ever been in his career in Buffalo. A good, solid offensive player who we signed to an extension this offseason, so he will be around. Shamar Jenneret, batting 326, 27 homers, and 85 ribbies on July 1st. OPS over 1,000, 177 WRC plus, team best 3.6 WAR. Looks like he could be in the mix to perhaps duplicate what he did in Texas 2 years ago when he led the league in homers, ribbies, and OPS and was named MVP. As we've talked about, he's leading the league in homers and ribbies now, not too far off from a triple crown in terms of his batting average. So he is doing exactly what we hoped he would do when we brought him on board about a year and a half ago. Tim Gaglia, young center fielder, hitting 286 in 126 at bats. He has also spent a little bit of time in Albany for us this year. 118 WRC plus on the season, and with that 70 outfield range, above average error and arm ratings, he's a good defensive center fielder. James Wood, the new addition in the offseason, has been playing some center field for us as well. Batting just 212, he does have 8 home runs and 146 at-bats, so kind of giving us the power that we hoped for from him, but certainly we're hoping for more than a 212 batting average. He's basically been a league average offensive player and a bit above replacement level. So I would have to say that he's a bit of a disappointment thus far. Jace Barofin has not disappointed, hasn't played a ton since he's only regularly playing against left-handed pitching, but he is hitting 378 with 10 home runs and 90 at-bats, so Barofin making the most of his opportunities. A couple of other guys to check in on that you may be wondering about. Arturo Flores, who has been up with us a bit, was 3 for 10 while he was up. Dominating in AAA, hitting 315 with 26 homers and 251 at-bats. He will certainly be in the mix to be a September call-up, and when we slim the playoff roster to 12 pitchers and expand by a position player, I think he could end up in a similar role to last year in the playoffs, where he's in the lineup every day against left-handed pitching in the playoffs. I guess that's not every day, but whenever we play left-handed pitching. And I think he's still got a potentially big role for our team going forward. The other guy, Tyreek Hardage, we've had him playing first base down in AAA just to make him a little more versatile. But with his outfield skills, he's likely going to be an outfielder for us when he's back. He's just gotten caught up in a numbers game like Gaglia this year, hit 241 in 174 major league at-bats, so he hasn't been as productive in the majors as Gaglia, which is why the last time we had to make a decision, we sent Hardage back down to AAA, hitting 347 with 8 homers and 95 at-bats there. So similar situation for Hardage and Flores. Our lineup, which is the best lineup in baseball, is just so loaded that struggling to get them regular playing time at the major league level right now. If Wood doesn't start hitting better, could we look to move on from somebody like him and bring Hardage back up, or even a Flores back up? I think that's certainly possible, since Wood is competent defensively in center field, but not great. Still think we're going to give him more time, but Wood is also a guy who we've got team options the next 2 seasons, so if he doesn't get more productive with us this year, moving on from the likes of Wood or Barofin this coming off season, as well as potentially likely moving on from Marcelo Meyer, should allow us to open up those spots on the 26-man roster next year with more regular playing time for the likes of Flores and Hardage. So feel like things are going pretty well for Buffalo here as of July 1st. We're going to have some decisions to make as we get closer to the trade deadline. Don't feel like there's any obvious holes to fill with a team that's 56-24. Best offense in the league, second best pitching in the league. But if there's opportunities out there, we'll certainly investigate them. Not that we have to only look at who's on the trade block, but might as well check in and see if there's anything interesting out there. Most interesting batter, Jesus Sanchez, has some pop, decent defensive outfielder, left-handed hitter. He is fragile. But he still has hit 277 with 14 homers and 271 at-bats this year for the Yankees. Kind of doing what we had hoped Mr. Wood would be doing for us offensively. Unfortunately, Sanchez, I don't think, is an answer in center field. The 55 range, he could play the position if we put him out there. 37 years old. We'll have to see if we're interested in what the Yankees are looking for him. Pitchers, anyone real interesting out there as far as a starter? Doesn't look like it. Not surprisingly, there's some decent relievers available. Santiago Suarez, Andrew Baker among them. So no one who I think is going to be a revolutionary impact for us available on the trade market at this point. But again, that doesn't mean that we won't be able to find somebody who can help us when we do a deeper dive going forward. But pretty happy with the team that we have right now. Pretty happy with how the draft turned out. At this point, we've got everybody signed except Alexis Mazuka. So we will sim through this next month in our next episode, get through the All-Star game and the trade deadline. And if we don't bring on a bunch of salary in trade, there's a chance that the impossible to sign Mazuka could be a guy that we'd go after. Right now, he says he's looking significantly above $10 million to consider signing. Although we've spent most of our draft budget, you can see that we do have over $13 million available. So signing Mazuka, if we decide to, is not an impossibility, particularly if we don't bring on a lot of salary as we get closer to the trade deadline. And we'll find out the answers to those questions in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.